Hello everyone, this is Sonia Byers, CEO of Women in Transport, and you're listening to the Women in Transport podcast. Here we uncover how the intersection of identities produces different experiences for different people. While some identities may be more privileged due to their class, race, gender or faith, others may experience inordinate discrimination. Join us as we hear from the Women in Transport and take an inspiring and analytical lens through which we will understand how power and privilege interface and cross over.
Welcome everybody to the Women in Transport podcast. Today's episode is all about South Asian Heritage Month, with this year's theme being storytelling. I am joined today by some inspirational women who will tell us each around their stories along heritage and what South Asian Heritage Month means to them. I'll allow them to introduce themselves and then we'll head into some lively questions.
Hi everyone, my name is Monica Kohli. I'm a maritime lawyer by profession. I've been doing this for about 2 decades. I'm here because I'm president of Women's International Shipping and Trade Association UK and also chair of the Indian Maritime Association UK.
Hi everyone, I'm Kalirai. I'm the Sales and Partnerships Director here at National Express. I've been working in the transport industry for about 30 years. I also run the hub in the West Midlands for Women in Transport.
Hi, Jenita Treacy. I'm a senior product manager in Transport for London, and I'm also the chair of the TfL Race Colleague Network Group.
Hi everybody, I'm Nafisa Nathani and I'm a project manager for diversity and inclusion for the Network Rail Southern region. So my background is communications, but I'm also part of the leadership team for our race network, Cultural Fusion, and our faith and belief network, the Multi-Faith Network.
Hi, I'm Rupali Sharma-Patel. I am head of assisted transport services at TfL. I'm also a mother of 2 kids, 2 daughters, so I feel quite a lot of responsibility around sort of encouraging and supporting women from sort of South Asian background. So, but lovely to be here, and thank you for inviting me, Shireen.
Thank you so much. And I'm Shireen Ali Khan, Intersectionality Lead for Women in Transport and your host for today. So very first question, everybody, tell us about your South Asian heritage. So when we say storytelling, what story do you immediately think of?
So I am a Punjabi Sikh. My dad came from India, from the Punjab, in his early teens. He came here to build a life for my mom and himself and a family. And so I guess they were like early immigrants from India back in the 60s. And what amazes me is the kind of barriers that they must have faced when they came here. And they didn't really, as we were growing up, they didn't really labour the point. They just got on with it. And that's the bit that always shocks me when I look back now and look at all the challenges that we face, being second generation or my daughters being third generation. And I think, how did my mom and dad navigate all of this complexity? And back in the day, back in the early 60s, racism was prevalent. Yeah. It wasn't, they weren't just accepted for who they were. They had to look at things like changing the way they dress, cutting their hair, not wearing a turban, all of these things. And they would do that just because they wanted to fit in, they wanted to integrate. But they wanted to integrate, but also hold on to their core values. So things like helping set up Gurdwara in the Midlands, just so that they had a community, a place to go. And you know what? And all the moms would cook all the same dala and sabjis and all the rest of it. They didn't have social media. They didn't. How did they know all of this? How did they know to do all of the same things, wear the same fashion, all of that? But they did, because they formed a community and they just got on with it. And I think that, for me, is resilience. When people talk about resilience, I think they epitomise resilience when you look at what they had to contend with and where they got to in their lives and the values that they held precious to them, but also then integrated in the communities that were affording them the hospitality. And so, you look upon it and it's all very gracious in how they've handled themselves. They never rose to the challenges of racism that they faced. And they faced lots of issues. Just the speaking English language, not their first language, just navigating that whole British way of life must have been a real challenge for them. I'd love to have been a fly on the wall in the very early years when they first arrived, just to see how they would have handled that. But yeah, so that's kind of my background, and I live in awe of my mum and dad at the moment. And it's like the more I have, the more insight I have, the more conversations I have like this, the more I reflect on what it must have been like for them.
So yeah, that was really powerful what you said, Del, there. So I'm a first generation immigrant, so I'm probably grappling with some of what your parents must have grappled, but in a very different environment. So contrary to Nafisa, I've moved here with very little family. I don't have many connections in this country. I'm probably one of the first people in my family to move out. We are very close knit. I've got a really powerful support network in India. Both my parents live in Delhi. I've got two sisters, so most of my family live in India. I've sort of moved out just because I wanted to travel and explore, and I've sort of ended up in the UK. It was never a planned move for me. So when I think about my culture, I almost associated back to growing up in Delhi and in India, amongst this really big family support structure, which is like a big tree which shelters you and protects you. And when moving out here, it seems like you're out there by yourself. So it's been quite reflective and empowering as well to be able to make a life by myself. I'm bringing up two daughters in this country as well. So I think although we talk about differences, I have been made to feel very welcome in every community I've been and every room that I've been a part of. Obviously, there'll be challenges when you're different and when you're trying to do something different. But I think when I reflect back about my culture, I think it's given me a lot of resilience and a lot of adaptability to fit into quite diverse settings and be able to sort of adapt to them and be able to contribute to them. And I think faith plays a big part in it. I think what Nafisa you brought up and Dal, what you said, I think naturally being from a sort of from the subcontinent or the South Asian, we have quite sort of community-led values and quite different ways of thinking, which is more about community, supporting others, being a part of this wider ecosystem, which helps you to sort of get through in life.
So my parents are both from the Gujarat. They're both Hindu. They are both from, well, I would say both born in India as well. My grandfather was the first to arrive to the UK from Kenya. So when he was very young, he went to Kenya, part of the indentured servitude. Did a very long stint there, and different parts of East Africa as well. So I believe he went to a few countries, but he predominantly worked in Kenya, made a lot of friends there. And then during the Mau risings, like many other Asians, moved to the UK with his UK passport. And his wife, my grandma, and children followed shortly afterwards. Again, very similar to many other cases as well. And my father arrived as a teenager, so he must have been between 12 and 14, I would say. So plucked from India, put into, you know, a very English setting in terms of school, and I have no doubts, and he doesn't talk about it much, but I have no doubts that it affected him quite deeply, because there was a language barrier, food barrier, making friends, and, you know, that whole social aspect as well that he must have struggled deeply with. So deeply that he doesn't actually talk about it much. So yes, and also it was in the, I would say, 70s, so ripe for racism as well. And he remembers the media and some of the portrayals around policy that they were invoking at the time to try and shut the borders down and let's not let any more brown people come. So yeah, he remembers all of that, and I think it did deeply affect him. And then my mum was brought here by my grandma when he was at the age, or deemed appropriate for the age of marriage. So my mum was brought from India. Again, you know, all those barriers plucked from one country, dumped in another, with a lot of expectations around her in terms of trying to assimilate while also being very culturally Indian. And I grew up in that setting, so trying to straddle both cultures, I found it actually quite difficult, because I was expected to be one thing at school and then something else completely at home. And I also had a lot of diverse friends, and actually my parents were really receptive, they both were, to those diverse friends, me bringing them home. They would feed them, so yeah, they had no problems with that. They were really happy to accommodate, but I did find it hard growing up in that setting.
Yeah, so it was quite interesting listening to everyone, because obviously everyone comes from a different, very different understanding of South Asian to each other also. And, you know, I noticed that Rupali is from Delhi, and I also grew up in India, but I grew up in Calcutta and Bombay and Bangalore and Delhi. I'm a Punjabi Hindu. You know, so it's very nice to see lots of Punjabis on this, of course. I never learned Punjabi. My parents never taught me. So can I blame my parents? I don't know. But we grew up in Calcutta, so I think I learned more of Bengali than I learned of Punjabi. So I kind of feel like, okay, am I more Bengali because I grew up in Calcutta? And you know, I mean, all of us know India is so diverse from east to west, north to south. It's sometimes in my heart I feel very Bengali because I grew up there, but I also feel Punjabi because, you know, that's what my grandparents spoke. I didn't, but my grandfather came across the border, so I've been hearing those stories growing up in India. So that's the connection I have, I think, with the lost of you. It doesn't matter where in the world you are, those connections, you know, do matter, being South Asian. But I moved in like 2009 to UK, so, and much like Rupali, I do feel very welcome here. Maybe it's also seeing the change. Everyone is very welcoming, and it's because of your grandparents and your parents who've, you know, assimilated, that makes us feel welcome today, I would say. So, you know, a huge thank you to them to make it so normal for us to be here, for everyone to see so many brown women, that it's not unusual for someone else to turn up from India and start working and not feel different in any way. So there is that part of it that has maybe made it very much smoother for us. I come from shipping, which is a bit different from everyone else. Shipping is 2% of women sailing, so the figures are quite interesting, very low worldwide. Brown women, if it's 2% worldwide, you can imagine how many brown women there are. I grew up on a ship for the first 5 years. My dad's was a sailor when I was growing up. So I spent the first 5 years on a ship. And until I was 14 or 15 and I had to choose my career, I always thought I would be sailing. There was nothing else I would be doing. Daddy was a sailor, Monica would be a sailor. But I had never seen any woman sail, you know, and again, I'd never seen any woman in India sail. So there is that story, of course. And then when I moved to the UK, and now when we speak, there are many women who would have been sailing at that time. I just never met them. And they were, you know, just in the UK or in Northern Europe or all around the world, but not in India. So, you know, heritage matters, because you see is what you can become.
Thank you. So for me, my South Asian heritage, it's complicated when we think about these things, because it doesn't necessarily start from somewhere, it doesn't really end somewhere. And when I initially think of this question, I kind of look back to early noughties, when you were at school or at university, listening to all of the Bangla music that came out at that time, because it was so prevalent, and you felt like, you know, I'm really Asian, because this music was representing you, was hitting the charts, and you felt like everyone was getting it on the vibe. And every summer holiday you'd be out in the streets, and all the songs would come back on. And so I kind of like look at that in a jokey sense, because for me that's kind of where I started to understand a little bit more about what being South Asian meant, because it was popular.
and it was starting to get a bit accepted because it was cool. And Dal, there's going to be stories that we can talk about, and I think you know where I'm getting at, but where Punjabi was being cool because it was sexy again, it was sellable. And so you then thought, oh, I could be part of that because there's some pride associated with it. But before all the things that you've said, so my family kind of heritage, and I've always spoken with pride, but now with the sense of complexity. But a lot of my like the men in my family are quite military, First World War, Second World War, and I speak really with pride. Like they were all fought in my uncles of like all the generations, and my grandparents and great grandparents, all fought in the First World War, Second World War for the British and with the British, side by side, all that kind of stuff, and very like involved in the sense of like the time of the Raj. And I used to always kind of have pride around that because you're taught as a British person to have pride about the Raj, and it's only when you read and you're like, oh, okay, not so great, and there's a whole thing in there. But at the time, you're taught like it's a real thing to be proud of. So I grew up the whole time feeling that sense of what it means to defend, or what it means to be part of this community, which was the Raj. And the Brits asked a lot of people to come over to the UK afterwards. My parents are part of that generation that came to rebuild the UK after the wars, when it wasn't as it is now. And I know things are tricky in the political climate now, but it wasn't accessible as it was now. Britain was broken, absolutely broken. And so a lot of migrants came over then to actually hand bricks and mortar fix it. And so we're part of that generation who came over, and so I feel immense pride in that sense as well. But then there's the bit in between, which is where you've got that racism and you've got that otherness and you've got that, do we assimilate? Do we bring up our children speaking English? Do we bring them up speaking our own home language? And we assimilated, we've done our best to assimilate. And because of that, you lose certain things. So my culture was very much a sense of being deliberate. I got to the age of about 16, and my maternal grandfather passed away back home, and I say back home, I visited Pakistan maybe 2 or 3 times in my life, and I define myself as a Pakistani Punjabi. I'm very proud of it. But I've gotten to an older age to be proud of this stuff. And so, but to learn what my heritage means, yes, we've got the internet now, which is great. 50 years ago, didn't have these things to us. And so in learning that, I've become to a space where I really love about my heritage. I was very much brought up about being kind of second class because you were brown. And now I'm like, actually, Pakistan's pretty badass. We do really amazing things. And so just beyond cricket, right? Like there's so much is happening there. So for me, it's about that self-education and that pride that I can now have. And I've got a child, so what does that being South Asian mean for him? So for me, South Asian heritage is it's mixed, it's complicated, it's amazing, it's also really messy, and it's filled with trauma, but it's filled with amazingly brilliant stuff that I think in our stories, in our generations, we can pick out those things that we want to take forward. Okay, so on to our next question. And I think we've touched on this in some of our conversations, but to take the floor, anybody, what does being authentic mean to you, whether it's people, spaces, experiences? We've mentioned faith a little bit in our kind of monologues. What does it mean to you?
Yeah, I can go. I think for me, like a lot of what being authentic is just being treated like a human and not necessarily being stereotyped, but being allowed to really have that complexity and nuance. Like I really don't want my identity to be defined by supposedly like how oppressed I am. And sometimes like I think it is. Those stories that we've all told about our ancestors who lived through partition and displacement and even potentially fought in like anti-colonial movements, those stories aren't really being told. And I am really tired of forever seeing like South Asian women positioned as like between two cultures, or like really stuck between like an Eastern and Western culture and being oppressed. And I just think it's so simplistic, and where are the nuances? I think what really opened my eyes really was, and I've spoken to Shireen about this quite a lot, was when Sabina Nesta was murdered. It wasn't just the fact that the British media didn't necessarily care about her death, but the fact the police didn't even investigate her death initially because they thought it was an honour killing. And then I just thought, oh my God, like, it doesn't matter like how integrated I am or how westernized I could ever be, like these real racial and religious stereotypes will always affect me. And like, I don't want to be negative, but I also I don't think that as a community, we really need to like reject our culture or identity to progress in the workplace or society. And I think like generationally as a community, we've always kind of equated like strength with silence, and like really traumatic things have always kind of been bottled up. And for my generation in particular, like I like to talk about things. It helps me like process like really traumatic experiences. And if I bottle things up, like my parents or even my grandparents like had done previously, like it would just lead to like real mental health challenges. And during COVID in particular, when I had to deal with really problematic behaviours and I didn't necessarily challenge them as early as I probably should have, you know, it did lead to real mental health issues. And I just wish that as a community, like we would come together regardless of like our different religious cultural backgrounds and actually talk about these things and these stories that really affect us, because I do think it's important.
I totally agree. I totally agree with you, Nafisa. It wasn't until, for me, it wasn't until recently, getting to be more involved in the whole race aspect in TFL, that I learned that South Asian Heritage Month was a thing, and then two, decided, right, well, I need to start learning about this. I need to, if I'm going to hold programs and if I'm going to do something in TFL, I need to do some research. So it wasn't until that, me picking up a few documentaries, books, researching what it was all about, that it gave me such a huge understanding and also a sense of belonging, which has been so valuable to me as you know, as a foundation for me in terms of learning to have some self-respect, learning to have some self-worthiness, because that honestly that wasn't there before, and also helping me understand some of the struggles of my parents, and even beyond that, you know, the wider community as well, and just the context and the culture, because sometimes it's so easy to point the finger and say, well, they're not doing it, it's their fault that I'm like this. But actually, when you start unpicking it all, it's so vast, and like you say, Shireen, it's really messy. So I can honestly say a few years ago I didn't have that understanding, and it would totally play out in all my insecurities. But learning about my culture has made me feel whole. Don't get me wrong, it's made me feel frustrated too, because there's certain conflicts where I'm just thinking, oh, come on, we can get over this. Let's just talk about this. But actually, I say that we are. So part of South Asian Heritage Month and putting a spotlight on ourselves and how we are is not just celebrating, but also inward looking and, you know, picking those bits apart, especially around the community, which is strong and it's got so many benefits, but I think it's got such high expectations there for so many people, and we all feel, and our parents included, feel so much pressure from it. But I was thinking, when I was doing some of the research, I was thinking back to what it must have been like and why that community formed in the first place. And you know, that pressure was very much born out of a place of love, right? There was a fear and shame that the pavements were not filled with gold or paved with gold when they arrived. And back at home, people were saying, oh, what a great opportunity you've got to earn loads of money and do well for your family. And how do you say, yeah, but it's actually hard and there's racism? What do they know about racism, right? So how, you know, I can totally see why they all formed together. There was a massive dependency, because you need a social structure of people that are going through the same thing, that are going to help each other. So yeah, it's enabled me to kind of unpick all of that and see things with a completely different lens.
Thank you. Thanks, Jenita. Who wants to come in?
I can chip in a little bit, Shireen, if you don't mind.
Of course.
So my experience has been completely different. Being, like I said, probably just where I am. I grew up in a very open and westernized culture in India, to a family which is sort of very empowering women in their household. Everybody was allowed to work, were highly educated. So I grew up around loads and loads of role models. When I first rocked up, I didn't think myself as different to anything. Very naively, I felt, yeah, I am who I am, and I was probably really grounded in myself. The first time I felt different was when I had my daughters, and that was the first time I experienced any kind of sort of differentiation between myself and the culture. And talking about authenticity, that was the first time I felt, oh my God, this is really going to be really difficult now, because this is different and this is hard because of the way it's set up. And I lived in this naivety for so long, thinking that, there's really, I'm not experiencing it, doesn't exist. And I think I've talked about this before with you, Shireen, about when I realized about the privileges that I had been given and had been brought up with when I went to a school. And this girl turned up and said, I would never have considered a career unless you were here. And that was the first time this was like a pile of bricks which dropped on me, thinking, my God, how could it not be accessible to you when it was accessible to me?
Mm.
And when I've sort of unpicked on that and then sort of spoken to more and more people, it's become more apparent about the privileges, again, my own privileges. So even though there's a sort of a lived experience piece, there's also experience about the community piece and what we grow up with and what experiences we are exposed to, through our work, through our sort of connections, through our communities, but also what life throws at us. So as I think there's almost as you've sort of alluded to, Jenita, earlier, that even though it all was happening, it was not apparent. What do you go and tell people? How do you sort of voice that? How do you share that, what you're experiencing is really difficult, really hard, but also you keep justifying it in your head. Say, it's worth it. It's going to be worth it. It's going to be worth it for my kids. It's going to be worth it for my family. And I'm going to put up with it as an individual. And I think groups, and when we come together as women and we all talk about empowerment and we are all really sort of powerful in how we speak, it does bring to home that we do have a lot of privileges, but there are lots and lots of people who probably don't. It's sometimes where I'm trying to say, it's sometimes all right to look at negatives, but only in a way that it brings out the positive. So
yeah, that's incredibly strong. And the only thing I would add to that, to your point around focusing on positives that come out of negatives, a piece of work that I'm doing independently is exactly that, which is looking at leadership traits, but ones that come out of trauma and all of the stuff that you can easily put yourself down on, but actually what traits do they lead you with? So all the things that, Darwin, you mentioned around our families coming, over to the country a very long time ago, all the things they had to go through, what does that leave us with? That leaves us with often a sense of resilience, a sense of courage, sense of just giving stuff a go. That entrepreneurship often comes because our forefathers just had to give stuff a go and we didn't have those choices. So there's a real privilege that I think that comes from having undergone some generational trauma. Dal, I'd love you to come in, and then Monica, please come in too.
So yeah, for me, authenticity, being authentic, utopia for me would be not to be labeled as anything. So I don't want to be called BAME. I don't want to be called Asian. I just want to be known for me. I'm not sure that will ever happen in our lifetimes, but certainly in like my daughter's generations, their experiences, their tolerances, their resilience are completely different to mine. And I observe this as a kind of a bystander sometimes, just watching how they behave. So that both myself and my husband are holding on to traditional values of our parents and our grandparents, whilst trying to bring up two daughters in a completely modern, westernized world where they don't really speak Punjabi properly. It's broken Punjabi, and my parents will chastise us for not teaching them properly, and so it's not entirely their fault that they don't hold on to the traditional values, but equally they don't hold themselves back with certain hang-ups that we carry around with us, because as kind of Indian girls, Asian women, we were you're going to get married in your early 20s. You can have your career once you've got married. Just you not go out, not have friends come round, you know. And that's what good was defined as, in certainly as I was growing up. But me and my sister, my older sister, the younger sister kind of benefited from my brother having broken several taboos and molds and just going completely rogue by becoming a pop star in that generation. And so, yeah, it was quite an interesting, eclectic experience. But back to my daughters, that they don't, I don't think they would, certainly they wouldn't badge themselves as BAME, or, you know, even with this like South Asian heritage piece, I'm not sure that they would consider themselves in there either. So they are very confident in their abilities. They're kind of forward thinking, and they're their own person. So they're not allowing these hang-ups to hold them back. So I think that it's quite a good mix, and it's quite interesting to see what's going to happen in the generations going forward. Arranged marriages are no longer a thing, certainly in the Punjabi culture. It's more they go out and they it's still different to westernized culture. So we still don't advocate they go out a million dates and you know, but they're, you know, it's not as strict as it was for when we were younger. So there's probably billions of podcasts that can be done all around arranged marriages and all the rest of it. But certainly think that authentic piece is around, let's ditch the labels, let us be and on an equal footing, whether that's women and men, whether that's you know, brown or white, whatever that is. That's kind of what it feels like we should be heading towards, and maybe are with the next generation.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. There's so many aspirational things in there, and it's interesting that sense around the role of women or marriage. And I've, like, for example, I got my husband to ask for my hand. He went to see my parents and asked for my hand. I was like, I'm not marrying you unless. And we were engaged within 6 months, so it was like not traditional, but like, so I met him myself. But at the same time, I was like, you need to impress the folks. So I feel like there's a good mix that we can have here, where you can have it where you have the choices that perhaps our parents and grandparents didn't have. But at the same time, you can maintain that sense of traditional and also that sense of family and that sense of, you know, communal environments, because often you don't have parents around so much anymore. And when you think about nuclear families, there's a lot of kind of societal breakdown there. And you know, whether you aim for that or not, when you can have it, why shouldn't we? So it's almost picking the best, I think, out of the cultures that help serve us and get us to kind of be as forward thinking as we are. Monica, please come in around your sense of belonging and what that means for you.
And I really liked what Dal said about being authentic. Being authentic, I do believe it's just being able to be yourself without having this need to fit in. And I really do think the younger generation are better at this than we are, maybe because of their education and everything that we've made ready for them, hopefully. So there are problems, of course, for the next generation. But I think one of the things they're very good at is being themselves in every way. And they're more confident about it. I mean, I don't think me or my friends at that age, at 14 or 16 or 18, could be who we are or what we wanted to be as easily. So I see little green sprouts. I'm positive for the new generation. I think they are more authentic. They're able to be more authentic than we are. Even today, I would say some of us, the ingrainedness of being a good girl, being seen and not heard, not being naughty, being liked, being pleasing to everyone. And even today, being told, smile, you know, why don't you smile? You have such a pretty face. Oh, the number of times you want to go get back to them, and then you're like, no, be nice. Be nice. You're a professional woman. Don't be nasty. Anyway, so authentic, yeah, just being able to be yourself without all your hang-ups and teachings from the last whatever decades you've been on this earth. Yeah, Shireen, back to you.
And on the sense of being a good girl, I have to say, like, if my parents ever listen to this, I don't know, when I was a kid, I just thought it's just too much hard work to be one thing at home and one thing at school, and that sense of, like, I saw people doing it around me, that sense of coming home and being very deatified, but then being at school and being very westernized. And I just thought it's just too difficult. And like the real life challenges that come with that, like, I'm, you know, just about it now because I'm older, but as a child, like, that's really quite traumatic. So I remember 16 was a very kind of pinnacle for me, and I think it was the loss of my grandfather, my mum's dad. I think that's what made me kind of shift in my choice around culture. I made a really deliberate step to just be me, And I probably am a bit naughty, like I can't cook properly. My mum was like, you've got a child and you still can't cook properly. Like I'm still looking at YouTube videos and step by steps, fry the onions, add the masala. Like I cannot do that rote. I have to follow instructions, but at the same time, I've got a pretty cool career that I've had behind me, and hopefully my family will look at that and feel proud. And I feel like from an impact and legacy perspective, I can see people using the stuff that I've worked on. Like you hope that when your time is done, like these things count for stuff. But I can't sew, like all those kind of homely things I can't do. But I love that. Monica, bring that back up again. Very very good. You can do loads of stuff. Yeah, I can't do those things, but at the same time, I'm not going to beat myself up about it because life's too short, right? It's too short. But I don't know, when I think about my heritage, Rupali, I think last year when we were doing the panel event, I went out that weekend or thereabouts to see like a Qawwali show. And for anyone listening who doesn't know what Qawwali is, it's folk music. It's quite South Asian in the sense of like Pakistan and India. I'm sure other cultures have similar music, but it's very folksy. And I remember listening to the band tuning. They weren't even playing, they were just tuning. And I started crying, and my sister looks at me, she's like, Shireen, they're not even playing anything. And I'm like, oh, but it's just my roots. So I feel like there's always emotive things that we can pick and choose from to actually kind of get through there. And for me, like I laugh about it, but the real sense of your DNA being connected to sense of places and spaces. And that for me, that's what South Asian Heritage Month is. It's about an opportunity to re-educate and to go back to those really amazing roots that we have, like around, like mentioned food, like in Jesper, food and the music and the culture, just that sense of belonging where there are so many similarities. And you know, I'd be remiss to not mention that South Asian Heritage Month covers lots of different countries. There's, you know, the Maldives, there's Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and India. And there are questions around the Kashmiri regions and how they're included as well, which is a point to note. But there are similarities around our cultures. There are similarities around our expectations. Rupali, please come in.
Yeah, I know we've talked about South Asian Heritage Month to say, you know, how whether it's important or not. For me, last year we did a panel event at TFL around, you know, what are the barriers from South Asian Heritage Month, South Asian Heritage Field. And my God, that is the first time I felt like I belonged to a community. So I belong to a community in terms of my, you know, where I am from, or you know, the group of friends I have. But to be in a room full of people who were professionals, who had the same kind of experiences at work, were trying to sort of ride against the same wave or ride on the same wave, or was incredibly powerful. So I felt really connected. I felt I had a community. I felt I had a place to go to, and some of the people I've met became sort of really good friends of mine, and we talk about things which are sort of really professionally led and the challenges we face. We've got sort of almost a support network to rely on, to go to, and not only that, it also gave an opportunity for people who are sort of outside the group to sort of look in and say, oh my God, these are the things you're going through collectively, and we can tap into this. So there are probably some questions around whether we need a full month to celebrate South Asian our culture or not. But it's a really good way to connect people and connect the dots around all of this and support each other in the workplace. So I really feel it's a really good thing for us to do.
Amazing, thank you. Who else wants to come in on that? And I'd like to explore what Rupali was talking about, like networks and belonging, and what the role is of our workplaces in supporting these stories.
I think it's important that you can have a conversation around all aspects of your life, as opposed to just siloed bits of your life, because you have to disentangle them from your culture and your whole self. So, and it's good to be able to have that safe space to do that in, where you don't have to explain and give a backstory. People get it. I think that's really important. That's key. So yeah, it's really useful to have that community feel.
Yeah, thank you. I really resonate with that, and a lot of the stories that we're telling through the intersectionality piece for women in transport is around having those safe spaces to talk about those stories, and probably to your point around having people who are not inside that community to have a look in, and then down to your point around creating those safe spaces where you don't have to over explain, because everyone has a journey, everyone's got a different journey, and there's no cut and paste identical journey to where we are all today, but there will be some similarities. And I think somebody ahead of the call said around, if it might be yourself, have that sense around dignity and respect, and all human beings want the same thing. Like, we all want to feel safe, we all want to feel accepted, we all want to feel like we can belong, we all want to feel like we can do our best in whichever sector, however old you are. We all just want the same things to be seen as human. But what happens is that we have our natural biases, we have a natural sense of survival, which often means that there are different communities that you might not understand, or you might think that, you know, there's a cake, and if I give a slice to somebody else, it means I'm doing without. And I always say there is no cake, there's no cake involved. There's enough to go around for everybody. But how can we open that inclusion piece to make everyone feel genuinely like they can be their true selves, and not have that tokenism where there's only, you know, X number of brown and black people in any work environment because they've come through in some kind of EDI way. Everything's based on merit, but enabling people to understand that they're there based on merit, but just really pick on those nuances, because, you know, how can you be your true self, and how can you do the best job possible unless there is a sense of understanding that we're human, and you know, bad things happen to us, good things happen to us, but we are just human at the end of the day.
Yeah, just to come in, so I was obviously part of that network group and that conversation that Rupali is talking about. It can be really difficult to have some of those conversations because you are showing your vulnerability, especially if you are looking to be ambitious or you're in a position where you've got a big team behind you. Showing that vulnerability can be really difficult. So it is important to have that network where it's not just you, it's a whole group of people that identify with, you know, the similarities that make you, to say, you know, it's not just her, it's me too, it's me too, it's me too. So I think that is so powerful. And also, so some of the feedback that we got around that that event we had last year was how powerful it was to see, one, for us to have that conversation, but then two, to see certain senior women like Rupali as role models in that space, and to say it's okay, you can feel like this, you can go through this, you can be who we are, and you can still make it. It's still okay. We are still stepping forward and breaking those barriers. So yeah, role modeling was a huge outcome that I saw in that I did not think. We didn't go into that space thinking, right, we want to create, we want to be a role model, we want to create that aspect or that being for people around us. That was not our intention, but actually it transpired to be that, which was really powerful.
I'd like to just write our kind of last direction to talk about allyship and kind of leading what you've spoken about role models. But obviously our conversation today has been around the woman story within South Asian heritage, and a little bit about our forefathers, but certainly about our story. But how can we bring those perhaps not necessarily part of the culture, or those who don't feel like they belong, could be part of the culture even, but also South Asian men and other allies, how can we bring them on the journey to understand what some of our nuances are, and how we can show up in the home life as well as in the workplace?
I think we can't do this with our allies. We are still a very small community trying to sort of make a change, and unless we are in a position where we can actually create a domino effect, that creating that change would be really hard. So we need to get people along with us and sort of share and learn from them, because this has happened in the past. People have tried to change the tide around something which was accepted, and we can do it together if we can, but we need people to support us. And I think it has to start from the people we know, the people we work with, and the people who genuinely want to see us grow. Again, I feel I'm in a position of great privilege. I have a husband who shares all the childcare burden with me. I have never been told that you are a woman, therefore you shall do this while I'll go and be the breadwinner of the house. It's been like, okay, you do everything and we'll share 50-50. And he's had to make sacrifices in his career as well as a result of letting me work. It's finding those people and who can channel that energy for us. Doing it in the workplace, as you say, the conversation that I've had in the workplace has always been about the cake. You know, if I'm giving you the slice, what happens to my slice? Which is probably not the right thing. We are facing grave challenges as a society, as a community, as a sort of as a world, and we need everybody's sort of individual knowledge and skill to solve some of these. So I think we have to sort of almost emphasize the value we bring to any situation through our resilience and calm and empathy, and sort of prove that value. I think Pinky Lilani, who runs one of the women's network groups, and her big thing is around kindness, and she believes that if you're kind and if you bring kindness to a table, that would be something that would be really valued. So it's things like that, you know, some things which are completely innate, and we try to bottle them down because we need to be this super confident, amazingly out there person. Is that really authentically us, or we are something different? And if we can be confident enough to bring ourselves, I'm sure we can prove to others how much value we bring.
Thank you. Who wants to come in next?
I was just going to say that I think another way to get allies, you know, to come on board is really through storytelling. You know, my comms background, it really is telling our stories and explaining what life is really like for us. And it's very much the story about uniting over our common values instead of our exclusive identities. And I totally, because I sometimes do this, and over the last 2 years, I've definitely done this, where I think if you face any form of like being othered or feeling like you're being discriminated against, you know, the natural tendency is to be a lot more insular, or, you know, to go into yourself. And I think, you know, it definitely shows your strength and resilience to be able to share your story and really unite over our common values. And I'm not sure that we do that enough. But just on that point about role modeling, you know, having somebody, particularly in an industry like we're in, having somebody that shares like a similar cultural background to you, really championing you and guiding you, does make a world of difference. And you know, someone that really understands your cultural context is best of all. So, you know, I did explain earlier on that very early on in this industry, I faced really like problematic behavior that I hadn't dealt with before. And you know, having a sense of, if I had that sense of community around me, I think I definitely would have challenged it earlier. And it literally took like one South Asian woman in Network Rail, who's relatively senior, to essentially like pick me up off the floor and help me fight against what I was facing. You know, she really understood it. I didn't feel like I was being gaslit or pigeonholed, and she really helped me process what was happening and helped me move on. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. And you know, those stories, the positive side of having a community around you, aren't necessarily told that well. And I just think that for me in particular, COVID changed the game for me. My like racial and religious identity really strengthened during COVID. You know, with the death of like Sabina Nessa, the Azim Rafiq scandal, those things that very publicly happened, like really affected me in really profound ways that I don't even think that I can even like articulate. And I just think that like the South Asian experience is really unique. On the one hand, like we are racialized as a community, we absolutely are. But then on the other hand, like we do benefit from the model minority narrative. So, you know, you can get South Asians within this community that don't necessarily like feel they've ever experienced racism, and on the other side, people feel it. So it's just like explaining that complexity and telling those stories where we can all come together as a community, I think are really important.
Thank you. It's really powerful, and I think you're quite right in highlighting some of those systematic things that occur. You know, you've kind of alluded to problematic behaviour that's occurred, and there was an ally that picked you up. Actually, what if that person wasn't there? What if someone hadn't recognised there was an issue that was happening? And I certainly, I feel like maybe others on the call have experienced those times where you look back and you know exactly which direction that behaviour was coming from, and you can label it yourself. But it's so micro, and it is in that micro aggression state where it's that gaslighting. You think, is it a thing? Isn't it a thing? And then suddenly afterwards you're like, yeah, it totally was a thing. And I certainly had a line manager that I worked with a few years ago on a project where when I first joined the team, he was actually shouting at a black colleague across the office. And I remember I've told the story so many times
Yeah.
how crazy it is. He was shouting at his colleague across the office, and I remember picking up one of my head of departments. I was like, no one's reacting. Can you tell me
Yeah.
what's happening here? The fact that no one's reacting means it happens regularly.
Yeah.
What have I signed up for? And his answer was, you could handle him. And
Yeah.
this was about 10 years ago, where you take that challenge, you're like, right, major project, I will handle him. And suddenly now I look back and I see that younger Shireen, and I'm like, no, that was absolutely not the thing to say. And I lasted there about 18 months. It was an amazing project. I was doing hugely impactful work. I was getting bullied every day. I was going home crying, not knowing what to do. And you do the right routes. I went through HR. I did everything that was supposed to do, and nothing happened. And so looking back, absolutely no ways behavior was directed to. It was absolutely to Black and brown women in the office. And you can name it now, because there are names for these things now. We've got definitely a way more sophisticated vocabulary that is empowering if you understand the meanings behind all these things. But it's like, what do you do with that information? So I really hope that these conversations enable the storytelling that you said, the allyship that we keep wanting and we keep asking for, because it's only through kindness, as Rupali said, it's only through kindness that we can actually support people and make it easier on other people. So thank you so much for sharing that. Dal, I know you were going to come in as well.
No, I was going to, on the allyship piece, for me, it was important to get that allyship in the home as well. So from your husband, your dad, all of the kind of male presence in the house, as well as your kids as well. So my daughters, and that helped me so much, because certainly I was, as back in that generation, you're always looking for affirmation that you're doing the right thing, and that everyone's happy, and that is a constant presence, that you're keeping everybody happy, everybody's alongside you as opposed to fighting against you. So that's important, I think, because if you feel happy at home, that relays back into the work environment. So there's an element of that. It's like, the perfect allies are in your home, that they're the ones that give you the strength and the courage to face the rest of the world.
Monica and Jenita, on the allyship, do you have anything to add, please?
Not really. I think it does matter to see yourself. I think it does matter, but I think allies come from all colors and all genders. So it's not just, and unfortunately for, there is one race and one gender that has been prominent. So you don't need allies everywhere. Yes, within the South Asian community, but I think it's networks of women that we need to build on first, and then move on to networks wider. As of now, I think build one network and carry it on. You can't work without allies, that's for sure. I agree with that. The old stage of you can have only women's things doing it. You're speaking to echo chambers, you're not going anywhere. So I think, yes, you do need allies. How do you build them? I don't have answers, Shireen. I noticed your question was, how do you do it? And I was actually thinking all through, like, I don't know. I guess it's all about kindness and talking and community building, one by one, and it's drops of ocean. And hopefully, your kids will see the benefits of what we do today. I don't see it happening in our generation. Jenita, sorry, I have nothing more to say.
So an interesting one. I think South Asian cultures can be really patriarchal. So finding allies in the family can be so finding allies within a family can be so difficult for so many. And so it's easier said than done when there's the expectation that you're going to be, again, going back to this hold that the community sometimes has, and this expectation of the community, where you are going to be the good wife, the good daughter-in-law, the good mother. So all these roles that are really tied heavily with women, and also the carer, right? So when your in-laws have health issues, it tends to be the woman that is looked upon to serve that position of being a carer. So it can be really, really difficult to build those allies in the home. And so I think it's even more important to have allies in the workplace that understand some of the issues that you might have, and some of the strains that you might have that take you away from the office, early on a Friday afternoon or whatever it might be, to attend that appointment with somebody. I think that's absolutely key. So those relationships, in making sure that you build them in the right way, with not just a network of people who understand what you're going through, but also line managers, and other managers, team managers, whoever it might be in the organization, to help understand that, you know what, there's this nuance here with certain South Asian cultures that we need to consider. When they're saying they've got a family issue twice in 1 week, it's okay, because I get that there's this pressure there as well. So I think it's really important for people to understand that. And storytelling, Nafisa, I think you mentioned it. I think that's such a powerful way to build on that, because not everyone knows.
So one of the good things is WISTA is going to be 50 years old next year. So that started, a long time ago now in terms of women's networks. And it started in UK, but there are about 57 countries with WISTAs nowadays around the world. So that's about 50 chapters of women in shipping or women's international shipping networks around the world. So no matter where we go in the world, if we reach out to our WISTA sisters, you'll always have someone to talk to. So that I think is a natural ally building across countries. And the commonality is shipping, which is an international thing, as is road, as is aviation. But I think one of the things that we are doing is talking a lot more to male allies, realizing that, and we have WISTA misters who are part of our community, who come to our events, who support us by being present, by showing, that they're kind of community. And the IMO recently set up a day for women in maritime. So Kitak Lim, who is the Secretary General outgoing in December, recognized that women in maritime need to be recognized and set up a day. So, I mean, you don't need someone in power, male or female, to recognize your importance or the fact that you need to be talked about at least one day a year. For South Asians, 1 month, but women in maritime 1 day, which is good enough to start. So we are trying now, like I mentioned, to stop being just echo chambers. Women in maritime understand the issues with women in maritime, but now we started talking to men who are also understanding the issues. And it's like the Me Too movement. You need it to snowball somewhere. So 20%, you get to 20%, and then people start listening. I just watched Barbie the other day. I don't know if anyone else has seen Barbie, but I thought it was quite interesting that the stereotypical Barbie is still white, blonde, blue-eyed. I mean, we have different Barbies, but they're stereotypical. So there's still a conception in people's head that when you're stereotypical, this is what you look like. And I think it's nice to keep breaking those barriers slowly and slowly. Maybe next time stereotypical Barbie will hopefully not be one color, but she can be one Barbie. So I think, yeah, so in terms of allies, we're just working. We're trying to get more men to come. So I think the last thing I'll end with, Shireen, is we had an event, and well, WISTA, it's Women's International Shipping, right? It's women in shipping, essentially. But at my last event, someone said, "Oh my God, Monica, you didn't have enough men at your event." And I just thought, oh my God, what a wonderful change for people to come and tell me from not enough women. So my goal is now to make sure there are at least 40% men at our next event. So it is important for men to listen to what we have to say and to be there and tell us what we can do differently, and listen, not encourage us, but how do you progress? It's because people notice you, see you, are aware of you, and offer you opportunities. So I'm hoping that more people of power, male, female, brown, black, white, are there, so that we can all progress together.
I think you're absolutely right, and the more conversations we have with people who are not, normally in those rooms, it takes it away from that echo chamber, because it's tiring. You're just talking to everyone agrees, and it's like we want the people who don't understand. And the amount of people who've come up to either myself or other people, women in transport, at events, or in whichever way, when they've heard a story and they've come up and said, "I didn't know you had it like this." It just shows you the power of having these conversations by saying, this is how these communities feel. This is how, when you're part of this demographic, this is the reality of it. Not every experience is cut and paste, as I said before, but at least having those conversations in there, you're creating a bit of a start.
So in Transport for London, as you know, the race colleague network group that I've got, we introduced a allies program, which is a 12-week program aimed for senior leaders. Very unique, as far as I know. I've had a a really in-depth look around many organisations, and then did try and figure out what other people do to see what best we can do. I couldn't find anything, so we arranged some sessions to figure out how we could do this, put some ideas together and put a program together. Okay, so we had 2 groups for 12 weeks and they have just finished, and the feedback has been incredible. They've learned things that they just did not know. They did not know certain privileges they had. They did not know how they could help on an everyday basis or in an everyday basis. So I think having programs like this, which I think more outside, more external organisations have started to roll out, is going to be really powerful in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think the more training and the kind of formal aspect of it is really important. I think whenever there's an opportunity for someone to control or any sense of authority over another person, there should be some governance behind it. So it's really innovative that you've got some training where people just know what to do, because it's obvious to some people, and then some people say, well, I just didn't know. So I think it's great that you're setting this up, and that's obviously quite groundbreaking if there isn't anything that's an equivalent there. Thanks to my guests as ever. It's always amazing people want to come around a virtual table and have these conversations, and please keep having them internally. And to those listening, anything you want to share on the socials, please do. There'll be questions in the podcast as well. On Spotify, you can communicate with us via that. And look forward to hearing everyone at the next podcast.
You've been listening to the Women in Transport podcast. Join us next time as we hear more from the women in our sector. Please visit the website for more details on how to become a member of Women in Transport, and remember to like, follow and share this podcast.